Because I was already lost, Kieran corrected. I didn't know it was love yet. I just knew I had to protect her, had to be near her, had to find out who she was. And then you followed the medicine show, Thomas added. For weeks, Lirelei picked up the thread. This stubborn cowboy followed us from town to town, working odd jobs, sleeping under the stars, all to make sure I was safe. Until the night you told him you loved him, Catherine said dreamily. Until the night I realized I'd found my home, Lirelei corrected. Not a place, but a person. Someone who saw me for who I really was, not who I was supposed to be. Then came the canyon, Michael said, his voice dropping to match his father's dramatic storytelling tone. The canyon, Kieran nodded solemnly. Where I learned that love isn't just about protecting someone, it's about being willing to die. For them, and more importantly, being willing to live for them. 24 men with guns, James said. Though as the eldest, he'd heard this part of the story most often. 24 men who thought they could take away our choice, Kieran said. But they couldn't. No one could. 'Cause when two people truly love each other, when they're willing to face the world together, nothing can defeat them. And Captain Morales saved the day, Catherine added. Love saved the day, Lirelei corrected gently. Uncle Ricardo just provided the opportunity for love to win. As the story wound to its familiar conclusion, the children began to drift off to their rooms. Catherine was the last to go, kissing both her parents goodnight before disappearing into the house. Kieran and Lirelei sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the trees, the creak of the house settling around them. Do you think they understand? Lirelei asked softly. What we went through to get here, they understand enough, Kieran replied. They understand that love is worth fighting for, that family is worth protecting, that home is something you build together, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you want. Really need. The only way to find what you're meant to have, he agreed. As they prepared to go inside, Kieran took one last look at the land that had become his world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cattle to move, fences to mend, the endless work of keeping a ranch running. But tonight, surrounded by the legacy of their love, he felt nothing but gratitude. He'd lost everything once, his ranch, his inheritance, his sense of purpose. But in losing it all, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found the woman who completed his soul, the family that gave his life meaning.
Yes.
And the understanding that true wealth couldn't be measured in acres or cattle or gold. It could only be measured in love, shared, lives touched, and the knowledge that what they'd built together would endure long after they were gone. Come on, cowboy, Lirelei said, taking his hand as she had that first night by the campfire. Let's go home. I am home, he replied, squeezing her fingers. Wherever you are, I'm home. Together, they walked into the house they'd built with their own hands, surrounded by the love they'd nurtured with their own hearts. Outside, the stars shone down on the Ashworth Ranch, blessing the legacy of a young cowboy who'd lost everything but found something far greater when he found her hand. The auctioneer's gavel came down like a death sentence, and 23-year-old Kieran Ashworth watched his family's century-old ranch slip away to the highest bidder. The drought had claimed his cattle, the bank had claimed his land, and now he stood in the dust with nothing but the clothes on his back and a horse that barely had strength to carry him. Going once, going twice, sold. The words echoed across the valley, where 4 generations of Ashworths had lived and died. Kieran's grandfather's weathered hands had built the first barn. His father's blood had soaked into this soil during countless seasons of back-breaking work. Strangers would walk these fields, and the Ashworth name would become just another forgotten whisper in the wind. Kieran mounted his mare, Starlight, and rode toward the horizon without looking back. The setting sun painted the sky crimson, matching the rage that burned in his chest. He had failed them all, his ancestors, his legacy, everything he'd sworn to protect. At 23, he was a man without purpose, without home, without hope. 3 days later, hunger drove him to the edge of desperation. He'd sold his saddle for a meal and a night's shelter, but pride kept him from begging. As he walked through the bustling town of Silverbrook, leading his exhausted horse, he noticed a crowd gathering around the town square. A medicine show had set up, complete with a painted wagon and a silver-tongued barker promising miracle cures. But it wasn't the snake oil salesman who caught his attention. It was the young woman standing beside the wagon, her dark hair catching the afternoon light like spun copper. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, but she carried herself with a dignity that made the finest ladies in town. Pale in comparison, her eyes green as spring grass, held a sadness that seemed to mirror his own. "Step right up, folks," the barker called. "Dr. Malone's miracle elixir can cure whatever ails you." The crowd pressed closer. But Kieran noticed how the woman, she couldn't be more than 20, stayed slightly apart, as if she didn't quite belong to this traveling circus. A drunk cowboy stumbled forward, leering at her. "How much for?" "Private consultation, darlin'?" He reached for her arm, but she stepped back, fear flickering across her features. Without thinking, Kieran moved. His fist connected with the drunk's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. The crowd gasped, the barker shouted, but all Kieran could focus on was the woman's wide green eyes staring at him in shock. "You didn't need to do that," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent he couldn't place. "I did," he replied, surprised by his own certainty. In that moment, looking into her eyes, he felt something shift inside him, a spark of purpose he hadn't felt since watching his world crumble. The barker, a thin man with oily hair and calculating eyes pushed between them. "Trouble, Lirale. Drifter giving you problems?" "No trouble," Kieran said, his voice steady, despite the turmoil in his chest. "Ach! Just making sure your lady is treated with respect." The woman Lirale looked between them, something unreadable passing across her face. "I can take care of myself," she said. But her voice lacked conviction as the crowd dispersed and the medicine show prepared to move on, when Kieran found himself walking alongside their wagon, unable to explain why he couldn't just walk away. He'd lost everything that mattered, but something about this mysterious woman made him want to find out what came next. For 3 weeks, Kieran followed the medicine show from town to town, working odd jobs to keep himself fed while staying close. Enough to watch over Lirale, she'd noticed, of course. He wasn't exactly subtle about it, but she hadn't told him to leave. Instead, she'd begun to seek him out during their evening stops, drawn by something she couldn't name, Dr. Malone, whose real name was probably as fake as his medical degree, treated Lirale more like property than a person. Kieran had pieced together enough to understand that she was trapped, debt, threats, or something darker kept her tied to the traveling charlatan. But she was careful never to speak of it directly, and he was careful never to push too hard. Tonight, they sat by a small campfire outside Millbrook, as the medicine show having concluded another successful day of separating fools from their money. Lirale had saved him some bread and cheese from her meager supper, and they shared it in comfortable silence. "Why are you following us?" she asked finally, her green eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Kieran considered lying, giving her some practical reason about needing work or traveling in the same direction. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "Because when I look at you, I remember what it feels like to want to protect something again." She was quiet for a long moment, then, "I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting sometimes," he said gently. "Even protectors." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I am." "I know enough." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "I know you're brave and kind and beautiful. I know you're trapped by something you didn't choose. And I know that whatever it is, you don't deserve it." Tears gathered in her eyes, and for a moment, he thought she might tell him everything. Instead, she reached across the small space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were soft but calloused from work, and they trembled slightly as they intertwined. With his, "I'm not who you think I am," she whispered. "Then tell me who you are." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, fear winning over trust. But she didn't let go of his hand. The moment shattered when Dr. Malone's voice cut through the night. Lirelei, where are you, girl? She jerked her hand away as if burned, jumping to her feet. I have to go. Lirelei, wait, but she was already running back toward the wagon. Leaving Kieran alone by the dying fire with the ghost of her touch still warming his palm, the next morning brought trouble. A group of men in expensive suits had arrived in town, asking questions about the medicine show. Kieran watched from a distance as they spoke with the sheriff, their voices urgent and serious. When they described someone matching Lirelei's appearance, ice formed in his stomach. He found her, packing frantically in the wagon, her face pale with terror. They found me, she said without looking up. I have to run. Who found you? People who want to drag me back to a life I'd rather die than live? She stuffed a worn dress into a small bag. You should stay away from me, Kieran. I'm nothing. But trouble. I've got nothing but trouble to spare, he said, stepping into the wagon. Where are you going? I don't know.
West, maybe.
Away from here? Then we'll go west together. She spun to face him, her eyes blazing. You don't understand. These men, they're dangerous. They'll hurt anyone who gets in their way. Good thing I'm not planning to get in their way. He smiled grimly. I'm planning to go through them if I have to. For the first time since he'd known her, Lirelei smiled. Really smiled. It transformed her face, making her look younger and more beautiful than ever. You're insane, she said. Probably, he agreed. But I'm not leaving you to face this alone. As they prepared to slip away before dawn, Kieran felt something he hadn't experienced since losing his ranch, hope. He might have lost everything he'd thought mattered. Maybe, just maybe, he was about to find something that mattered more. They rode hard for 2 days, pushing their horses to the limit as they headed toward the mountains. Kieran had traded his watch, the last valuable thing he owned, for a second horse and supplies. Behind them, dust clouds on the horizon suggested their pursuers weren't far behind. On the third night, camped in a hidden canyon, Lirelei finally told him the truth. My real name is Lirelei Castellanos, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. My father owns half of California, silver mines, cattle ranches, shipping companies. I was supposed to marry a man named Valdez, unite our family's fortunes. She stared into the fire, her hands clenched in her lap. Valdez is twice my age and has a reputation for hurting his wives. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I ran away on my wedding day, stole a horse, and rode until I collapsed from exhaustion. Dr. Malone found me, half dead in the desert. He recognized me from the wanted posters. My father offered a huge reward for my return. But instead of turning me in immediately, he saw an opportunity. He's been blackmailing you. She nodded. Work for him, help him run his cons, and he'd keep my location secret. But I think he's grown tired of the arrangement. Men in town, they knew exactly where to find us. He sold you out. It was always going to happen eventually. She looked up at him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I should have kept running alone. Now I've dragged you into this mess. Kieran moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to come. Why? The question came out like a sob. You don't even know me. I know enough. He turned to face her fully. I know. You're brave enough to run from a life you didn't want. I know you're kind enough to worry about a stranger's safety. I know you're strong enough to survive 2 years on the road with that snake oil salesman. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. And I know that when you took my hand that night, I felt like I was home for the first time since. I lost my ranch. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. They won't. How can you be so sure? Because I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. I failed to save my family's ranch. I failed to protect my legacy. But I won't fail to protect you. Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when she kissed him back, it deepened into something desperate and hungry. All the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks melted away, replaced by something pure and certain when they finally broke apart. Both breathless, Lirelei rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered, the words seeming to surprise her as much as him. "I love you too," he replied without hesitation. "It's more than I thought possible." They made love there by the dying fire, urgent and tender, as if they could hold back the dawn and their pursuers through sheer force of will. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the stars, making whispered plans and promises. "We'll go to Oregon," Kieran said, stroking her hair. "Start fresh where no one knows us." "I have some jewelry hidden in my bag," she said. "We can sell it, buy land, build something together. A ranch? Home?" She smiled up at him. "Our home." But morning brought the sound of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. A dozen riders approached, led by a man in an expensive suit and a wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, Kieran could see the family resemblance, the same dark hair, the same proud carriage. "Lirelei," the man called. "Enough of this foolishness. Come home, Papa," she breathed, her face going white. Kieran helped her to her feet, his mind racing. They were trapped in the canyon with only one way out, and 12 armed men blocked their path. The horses were exhausted from days of hard riding, and their ammunition was limited. "Stay behind me," he murmured, checking his revolver. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let you die for me. I won't let you go back to a life you hate." She squeezed his hand once, then stepped forward to face her father. "I'm not coming back, Papa. I'm not marrying Valdez. You're my daughter." Castellanos replied coldly, "You'll do as you're told." "I'm a grown woman in love with a good man," she said, her voice growing stronger. "And I choose him." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 12 guns against 2, family duty against love, the old ways against the new. In that moment, Kieran understood that whatever happened next would determine not just their fate, but the shape of their souls. "You choose him?" Don Castellano's voice dripped with disdain as he looked Kieran up and down. "This ... drifter? This nobody who can't even keep his own ranch from being sold at auction?" Kieran felt the familiar burn of shame, but this time it was tempered by something stronger. "You're right," he said, stepping forward. "I lost everything I inherited, but I'm not the same man who let that happen." "You're still nothing," one of Castellano's men sneered. "A broken-down cowboy with empty pockets and empty promises," maybe Kieran agreed, his hand steady on his gun. "But I'm the man your daughter chose, and I'm the man who's going to stand between her and anyone who tries to drag her back to a life she doesn't want." Lirelei moved to stand beside him, her chin raised defiantly. "I won't marry Valdez, Papa. I'd rather die first." "That can be arranged," a new voice said from the canyon entrance. Another group of riders appeared, led by a heavy-set man with cruel eyes and gold teeth. Even without introduction, Kieran knew this had to be Valdez. The canyon suddenly felt very small, with 24 armed men surrounding them. Castellanos looked genuinely surprised by the appearance of his daughter's intended husband. "Alfonso," he said carefully, "I didn't expect you to come personally. When my bride-to-be disappears for 2 years..." "I take it personally," Valdez replied, his gaze fixed on Lirelei with an intensity that made Kieran's skin crawl. "I've been looking forward to our wedding night for a long time, mi amor." "Dead body," Kieran said quietly. Valdez laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That was always the plan, Cowboy."
Ow.
The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Kieran could feel Lirelei trembling beside him, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Papa, please. You raised me to be strong, to make my own choices. How can you hand me over to a man who makes me feel like I'm already dead?" For a moment, something flickered in Castellano's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or old love. But Valdez spoke before he could respond. "Enough talk. I've wasted 2 years of my life waiting for this girl. I'll take her now, willing or not." "You'll have to go through me first," Kieran said, drawing his gun. "And me," Lirelei added, producing a small derringer from her dress. What happened next would be talked about in saloons for years to come. Kieran had expected to die in that canyon, but he hadn't expected to take so many with him. The first shot came from Valdez, meant for Kieran's heart, but going wide when one of the horses spooked. Kieran's return shot was true, catching Valdez in the shoulder and spinning him around, Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Kieran dove behind a boulder, pulling Lirelei with him as bullets whined overhead. He counted his shots carefully, 6 in the cylinder, and then he'd have to reload. Around them, men shouted, and horses screamed. The ledge, Lirelei pointed. To a narrow path leading up the canyon wall. If we can get above them, they made their break during a lull in the shooting, scrambling up the rocky slope as bullets sparked off the stones around them. Kieran's leg burned where a shot had grazed him. But adrenaline carried him forward. From their vantage point, they could see the chaos below. Several men were down, including Valdez, who was clutching his wounded shoulder and screaming orders. Castellanos was trying to restore order, but his men were scattered and confused. "This is our chance," Kieran said, reloading his gun, while they're distracted. But as they prepared to make their escape, Valdez's voice rose above the noise. "Castellanos, call off your men, or I'll make sure your daughter dies slowly." Shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear Valdez's labored breathing and the sound of a gun being cocked. "She's not down there," Castellanos said, looking around frantically. "No," Valdez smiled coldly, "but she will be. My men have the canyon surrounded. She can't escape, and when I get my hands on her, I'll make her pay for every day she's made me wait." Kieran felt Lirelei's hand slip into his. Her palm was slick with sweat, but her grip was firm. "I won't let him take me," she whispered. "I meant what I said. I'd rather die." "You're not going to die," Kieran said fiercely. "Wait, neither of us is. How can you be so sure?" He turned to look at her, this woman who had become his whole world, and smiled. "'Cause I'm not the same man who lost his ranch. I'm the man who found you, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take you away from me." If summoned by his words, a new sound echoed through the canyon, the thunder of hoofbeats. A lot of them. The dust cloud that rose from the canyon floor was like a signal flare of hope. Kieran squinted against the afternoon sun, trying to count the approaching riders. 20, maybe 30 men, riding hard and flying a banner he didn't recognize. Federals Lirelei breathed beside him, Mexican federal police. Below them, the standoff dissolved into chaos. Valdez's men, already rattled by the gunfight, began to scatter. Some of Castellanos' riders held their ground, but others were clearly reconsidering their loyalties. "Don Castellanos," a voice boomed across the canyon in accented English. "You were under arrest for crossing the border with an armed force?" The lead rider was a tall man with a magnificent mustache and brass buttons gleaming on his uniform. "Captain." Morales of the Mexican Federal Police had been tracking this particular group of wealthy Californians for 3 days, ever since they'd crossed into Sonora territory with enough firepower to outfit a small army. "This is a family matter," Castellanos shouted back. "We're retrieving my daughter, with 20 armed men," Morales replied skeptically. "I think not, Senator." From their perch on the canyon wall, Kieran watched the scene unfold with growing amazement. Valdez was trying to rally his men, but the arrival of the Federals had changed everything. What had been a simple kidnapping had become an international incident. "We need to get down there," Lirelei said urgently. "Before someone gets hurt." "Someone already got hurt," Kieran pointed out, indicating the wounded men below. "Besides, we're safer up here." "No, you don't understand." She was already moving toward the narrow path. "Captain Morales is my godfather. My mother was his sister." This revelation stopped Kieran cold. "Your godfather?" "Mama died when I was young, but Uncle Ricardo never stopped looking out for me. He must have been tracking Papa's movements." She paused to look back at him. "I sent him a letter before I ran away, telling him about the forced marriage. He said if I ever needed help." They descended the treacherous path as quickly as they dared. Below, the situation had stabilized into a tense standoff. The Federals had superior numbers and position, but Castellanos' men were desperate and well-armed. "Lirelei." Captain Morales' face lit up when he saw her emerging from the rocks. "Mia, are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Tio," she called back, using the familiar term for uncle. "Now there's something you need to know about Valdez." The next few minutes were a blur of rapid Spanish, as Lirelei explained the situation to her godfather. weren't caught enough to understand that she was telling Morales about Valdez's reputation. The forced marriage and the pursuit across the border. Morales's face grew darker with each word. When she finished, he turned to address both groups of men. "Senor Valdez," he said formally, "you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and assault on Mexican soil." "I have done nothing wrong," Valdez protested, still clutching his wounded shoulder. "I am simply claiming my promised bride." "A bride who has clearly stated she does not consent to the marriage," Morales replied coolly. "In Mexico, a woman's consent is required for matrimony. This is outrageous." Castellano stepped forward. "I have the right to arrange her marriage. You have the right to suggest a husband," Morales agreed. "But you do not have the right to force her acceptance, especially not at gunpoint on foreign soil." The standoff was broken by an unexpected voice. One of Valdez's men, a young vaquero who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Capitan, this man lies about everything." He pointed at Valdez. "He killed his last wife, beat her to death, and claimed she fell from a horse. Whole territory knows it, but he has too much money and too many friends for anyone to speak against him." "Shut up, Diego," Valdez snarled. "You're speaking nonsense." "No, patron, I'm speaking truth." The young man's voice grew stronger. "I've seen what you do to women. I won't be part of it anymore." One by one, other men began to speak up. Stories of cruelty, of violence, of a man who used his wealth and power to escape justice. Even some of Castellano's men looked shocked by the revelations. Castellanos himself seemed to age 10 years in 10 minutes. "Alfonso," he said quietly, "is this true?" Valdez's silence was answer enough. "Papa," Lirale said, stepping forward, "I know you wanted to protect our family's interests, but this man would have destroyed me." Castellanos looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw a woman, not a child, a person with her own will, her own dreams, her own right to choose her path. "I'm sorry, Mia," he said finally. "I thought I was doing what was best for you. I know, Papa, but the best thing for me is to choose my own life." She reached for Kieran's hand. "And I choose him." Captain Morales surveyed the scene with satisfaction. "Well then, it seems we have resolved this matter peacefully. Senor Valdez, you will return with me to face charges. Us, Don Castellanos, you. And your men will return to California immediately." "And us?" Kieran asked. Morales smiled. "You, young man, will take good care of my goddaughter, and perhaps you will both visit me in Mexico City someday, so I can give you a proper wedding blessing." As the various groups prepared to part ways, Castellanos approached Kieran and Lirale one last time. "I misjudged you," he said to Kieran. "A man who would stand against impossible odds to protect the woman he loves. Perhaps you are not so poor after all." "I'm rich in the things that matter," Kieran replied, squeezing Lirale's hand. Castellanos nodded slowly, then surprised them both by pulling a leather pouch from his saddlebag. "Your dowry," he said to Lirale. "I always intended for you to have it, regardless of whom you married." The pouch was heavy with gold coins, enough to buy land, cattle, a new life together. "Thank you, Papa," Lirale said, tears streaming down her face. "Be happy, Mia," he replied. "That's all any father really wants for his daughter, is the sun." Set over the canyon, casting long shadows across the scattered rocks, Kieran and Lirale found themselves alone together for the first time in days. The danger was over, the future was bright, and they had each other. "So," Lirale said, leaning against him. Oregon, Oregon," he agreed. "Our own ranch, our own life. No more running, no more running." They mounted their horses and rode west, toward the setting sun. Toward a future they would build together with their own hands and their own hearts. 3 months later, Kieran stood in the middle of 640 acres of Oregon territory. Breathing in the crisp mountain air that carried the scent of pine and promise, the land stretched out before him like a green carpet, dotted with wildflowers and bisected by a clear stream that would provide water for crops and cattle. "This is it," he said to Lirale, who was examining the soil with the practical eye of a rancher's daughter. "This is where we build our life." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and smiled at him with such radiance that he felt his heart skip. It's perfect. Remote enough that we won't be bothered by the past, but close enough to Portland that we can trade and buy supplies. They'd chosen this spot carefully after weeks of searching. The previous owner had been a bachelor homesteader who'd given up, after a harsh winter, selling his claim for a fraction of its worth. The rough cabin needed work, but the bones were good, solid logs, a stone chimney, and a small barn that could be expanded. I can already see it, Learley said, turning in a slow circle. Cattle in the lower pasture, horses in the corral by the stream, maybe some sheep on the hillside. And a garden, Kieran added, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You mentioned wanting to grow your own vegetables and flowers, she said, leaning back against his chest. Lots of flowers. After 2 years of dusty towns and medicine shows, I want to be surrounded by color. They'd been married in a simple ceremony in Salem, with only the justice of the peace and his wife as witnesses. No family, no fanfare, just 2 people pledging their lives to each other. Learley had worn a simple white dress bought with their careful savings, and Kieran had traded his worn boots for a clean pair and a new shirt. Mrs. Ashworth, he murmured against her ear, still marveling at how the name sounded. Sturry Ashworth, she replied, tilting her head so he could kiss her neck. I love the sound of that. They'd kept his name, deciding together that it represented a new beginning for both of them. The Ashworth Ranch would rise again, not as a monument to the past, but as a foundation for the future. We should start on the house addition first, Kieran said, reluctantly releasing her to point toward the cabin. We'll need more room before winter. Learley turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Are you expecting company? I'm expecting to need a nursery, he said, his voice tender. That is, if you want children. I want your children, she said simply. I want little boys with your stubborn chin and your kind heart. I want little girls with your determination and your gentle hands, and your beauty, he added, and your courage, and your grandfather's stories about the old ranch, she said. You'll tell them about their heritage, about the Ashworth name, and what it means to work the land. They'd talked about this during their journey to Oregon, how they would honor the past while building something new. The original Ashworth Ranch was gone, but its spirit would live on in whatever they created. Here, the next months pass in a blur of hard work and quiet contentment. Kieran threw himself into expanding the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Learley tackled the garden with the same determination she'd once applied to surviving on the road, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the rich Oregon soil. They bought their first cattle in late summer, a small herd of mixed breeds that would form the foundation of their future operation. Kieran had learned from his father's mistakes, diversifying their income streams and planning for lean years as well as fat ones. Look at them, Learley said one evening, as they watched the cattle grazing in the golden light of sunset. They're ours, really ours. We're ranchers again, Kieran said, wonder in his voice. I never thought I'd be able to say that. You never stopped being a rancher, she corrected. You just needed the right partner to help you remember. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Learley's condition became obvious. She was carrying their first child, due in early spring. The news filled Kieran with a joy so profound he could barely speak. I want to name him after your grandfather, she said one night, as they lay in their bed, her hand resting on her growing belly. If it's a boy, what if it's a girl? Then we'll name her after your grandmother. I want our children to know where they come from, to understand that they're part of something larger than themselves. And if they want to leave the ranch someday, Kieran asked, if they want to see the world, have adventures, then we'll let them go, Learley said without hesitation, with our blessing and our love. But they'll always know they have a home to come back to. Winter came early that year, blanketing their valley in pristine snow. But the cabin was warm, the cattle were sheltered, and they had each other. On the coldest nights, they would sit by the fire and plan for spring, which crops to plant, which cattle to breed, how to expand their operation. I've been thinking, Learley said one such night, her knitting needles clicking softly as she Worked on a baby blanket. Should invite my father to visit after the baby is born. Kieran looked up from the harness he was mending. Are you sure? After everything that happened?